This is the Spritz Girl Mindset Podcast, and I'm your host, Courtney Young. If girlhood is a mindset, this is where we practice it out loud and unfiltered. We're healing, we're yapping, and we're doing it with spritzes in hand. Here's your permission slip to be soft, messy, and magnetic as hell. So grab a spritz, grab a seat, no small talk, just the real stuff. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Spritz Girl Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Young, and today I am so excited about our guest that we have on today. Her name is Abigail, and she is just such a ray of sunshine.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here as well. So, like she said, my name is Abigail. My name is Abigail Gagnon, and I am a 31-year-old wife, and I'm a podcast host, community builder, and I also deal with multiple chronic illnesses. And before I was unable to work outside the home, I was in food service for many years and loved it. And yeah, I enjoy reading, time by water. I actually live right on water, which I am very thankful for. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Oh my gosh, that is so fun. You're in the US, right? Like, where are you
Yes.
from?
So I'm in Maine.
Oh my gosh, Maine is on my list to go visit. I've never been there. I'm actually in Orlando, so that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, if you ever come up here, let me know.
Okay, I absolutely will. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and let's start a little bit about your story. Who are you? What brought you here? If you just want to give our audience maybe a little bit of that context and let us know who you are.
Yeah, of course, of course. So I am a New Englander. I grew up in New Hampshire, and I am the oldest of four. I grew up in a home that we went to church, grew up in kind of like a Christian household. And like I said, I worked in food service for many years. One of the places I worked was a Christian camp, and I worked in the kitchen, worked front end, trained people. I was there for a long time. And then I also worked at various restaurants in the fall because we were less busy in the fall. We had conferences that came, but it wasn't as busy as the summer, obviously. And then I started to get sicker with different chronic illness stuff. I have been in constant pain since I was a teenager, and have had multiple things that have happened, but it didn't start to get worse until 2016. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I can work at like a contact center or something that's less grueling on like my back and that kind of portion of it. And unfortunately, not knowing that some of what I was dealing was like silent migraines, it got so
Oh
much
my,
worse working on a computer and being in fluorescent lights and trying to learn stuff that I'd never had any, knowledge about before. So that was not really a good fit. And so I put in my resignation there after being on short-term disability for a while and trying to figure stuff out. And then I ended up starting a community on Facebook and Instagram and Messenger and Marco Polo. And we do a lot of like just trying to, connect people with other people that are going through things that they're going through. We do book studies, we do Bible studies, we, just help remind people that they aren't alone and that there's more to life than, their little bubble. And we've got people from all over the world there, which is really awesome. And then a couple years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I started my podcast. That kind of, I feel like, is a little bit of an extension of the ministry. It's not affiliated with that in any way, but just the fact of trying to make people feel seen and heard and less alone and connecting people with other people. And I've just really, really loved being able to do this now. And I'm hoping to continue doing it for a long time.
my goodness. That is so cool. First of all, I love that you use Marco Polo because I'm a big Marco Polo stan. I feel like so many people don't
Oh
really
my
know about it, and it's my
gosh, I
favorite.
love it. Are you an
It's the
ambassador as
best.
well?
Yes, I am.
Oh my
I
gosh,
am,
girl,
but
we
I
need to connect on there.
I use it with all of my clients and all of my friends and family, but I love Marco Polo. I'm a big fan of them. So that's great. Just out of my own curiosity, what denomination was the church you were affiliated with?
So we went to multiples growing up. One was a Baptist church. Then we kind of had like a home church that I think was non-denominational. I would classify myself as non-denominational, and the church that I attend now is non-denominational.
Very cool. So I asked because before I started the podcast, I'm now a salon manager. So I'm in a very different journey. But for a long time, I worked in the Methodist church. So I was a youth pastor. I was director of community engagement. So I did all of that as well. I also attended multiple non denominational churches, all that good stuff. So I was just curious for my own, like,
Yeah.
want to know. But that's
Yeah.
awesome. So you've been so open about navigating trauma and chronic illness. I can't imagine how hard that's been. I have PCOS. So that falls in a not the same category, but a very similar category where you are struggling with some of those silent illnesses that not a lot of people understand or even know about. What was the moment for you? Obviously, your whole life changed when you realized you had to, shift. You couldn't necessarily be on your feet or like working in that camp you love. What was that moment for you that you realized your story wasn't over? It was just shifting.
So for me, it kind of was two parts. So one, when I was like, okay, I need to leave. I don't want to leave. It was really, really hard for me. And I think that some people that either worked there or knew me thought like didn't realize the grief that I felt throughout that and
Mm.
like how hard it was because they're like, oh, she's leaving on her own. She's excited about this new opportunity. And it's like, yes and no. Like I am, but I've been here, worked there in the summer. I lived there 4 months out of the year. I was there basically every day for 7 years. Like, that's a
Wow.
long chunk of time to be there almost every day, and then I was there for, like, before that and not living there, but, like, regardless, like, that's a long time to basically be living somewhere and be around people every single day from, like, the time you get up, essentially, to the time you go to bed, so it definitely was really hard, and at the time, I was like, "Okay, well, now I'm starting this new journey, and I'm gonna move away and move to a different town and meet new people, and it's gonna be great, and I'm gonna have paid time off and, whatever, it's gonna be great." But then when I realized that that wasn't fixing my issue, and then, like I said, in some ways it was making it worse, it was really hard. Like, I felt like not only and looking back, I can see this now, but I feel like I was dealing with depression because not knowing what was wrong with me. Doctors kept telling me, "Oh, it's this, it's that," and it's like, "No, none of these things are working." And then in addition to that, like, I was also grieving my camp family and my camp home and the place that basically saved my life in many ways. And so that was really hard. And then I realized because I had been depressed and suicidal in the past that I was like, okay, I do not want to go down that road. I don't want to get to the point where I want to take my life. So I signed up for BetterHelp and I did a couple months of therapy and the therapist really encouraged me like, hey, even though you can't work right now, even though you don't know what's wrong with you and you can't always do things that you want to do, like try and come up with somewhat of a routine for the morning and a routine kind of in the night and figure that out so that you can at least, check something off your list and feel like you've, done something, even if you do a couple things and you have to immediately get back in bed. And that really helped. And then I also started the community and stuff through Facebook and Messenger. And that really gave me purpose too, to like be able to, put that stuff that I had, done in the camp ministry, then start doing it like online and being able to connect with people and meet people. And so that really was kind of like a turning point and realizing like, even though I'm helping people in a different way than I used to, and even though I'm connecting people in ways that I didn't used to, like that doesn't make it any less just because it's something different.
Yeah, I love everything you just shared. I have so many different thoughts and so many different directions I want to go with that. The first thing I want to tap into is I think so many times people don't realize that grief is such an important part of the journey. And learning to grieve and to grieve well and to give yourself that space to feel that full range of emotions is so incredibly powerful, and it is what allows you to take your power back of your own story, right? Because so many times you have these things like chronic illnesses, using your story as an example. Like, I hate the phrase everything happens for a reason. I know they use it a lot in the church. I really hate
Hmm.
it, and the reason I hate it is because I feel like it's completely invalidating to what you go through, your experience, your story. And if we truly believe, like, we want to talk faith and all of that, we believe that God is the creator, that he's there for us, that he sees us. I personally believe that God wouldn't necessarily do things to harm me. And we could get into the theology of all that. But what I will say, and what I would tell my students all the time, is that sometimes things happen and anything can be redeemed for good, right? So sometimes these
Absolutely.
things happen to us and we can't control them. And that doesn't mean that they happen for a reason. That invalidates the pain, the sadness, the trauma that you went through. But looking back on this 10 years from now, everything that you felt, everything that you went through, all of it was valid and it will be used to make an impact or to make a difference one day. So I love that you shared that because that whole process I feel like is so important. I feel like that is the shift, right? It can be so easy to be so caught up in that sadness or in that, like, well, this happened to me, so it sucks, and like not be able to move on from it. But what people don't realize is that the way out is through, and you have to be willing to like sit in it and feel those things and let yourself feel that sadness to be able to move through it. And then you'll look back on your life in 10 years and be like, wow, like, not, I'm so glad this necessarily happened. That might not be your reaction, but your reaction might be like, wow, because this happened, this happened. And like, it's just really cool to be able to see stories come full circle like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think like when it comes to the church aspect, I agree about the it happens for a reason or God wouldn't allow it to happen, blah blah blah. And it's like we live in a broken world. Like things happen and they just happen because some people are not kind and some people are unhealed and things happen not because God's sitting up there going, okay, well, she's not listening or she's going through this. I'm going to, make this happen to her so that this can happen or that she can learn this lesson. I do think, sometimes, depending on what the person's, doing or what we're doing, that sometimes, yes, we need like a big wake up call and to hit rock bottom in order to have God, the universe, whatever, get our attention. But I don't think that's the majority of the time that that is happening. I think
Mhm.
it's life happens and what you make of it is, can then turn into your purpose.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that use of the word purpose there too, again, because it validates our experiences that we have gone through. Like I do
Mhm.
believe in the power of story and in what we bring to the table and how we can impact one another just by, sharing our stories. That's part of the reason I love hosting this podcast is my goal is to help you see your worth, your story through like maybe you learn something new about yourself. Maybe you've just been given a space to share your story, whatever that looks like for you. Like that is the most important thing to me is that each and every person feels that they have purpose, they have value, they have meaning, and their story matters. And it's making a difference every time you bring it to the table. For me, I've gone on a bit of a deconstruction journey myself. Like, I definitely still believe in God, but like the church, we have some beef. But like, I absolutely do believe in the power of the resurrection and in the power of story and in the power of who like God is. And it's because of that that I do still hold on to a Christian faith but I don't necessarily live out like a church life, if that makes sense. Like that's not a part of my story or my journey right now. But like I do believe in God. And the reason for that is because I believe in the power of story and because I believe Jesus champions us to believe in the power of story. And something I would always tell my students when I was a youth pastor was we need to live a life that looks like Jesus rather than just talking about Jesus. So like you hear that phrase, what would Jesus do? And like so many things we talk about what Jesus would do, but we aren't living our life the way Jesus would be living his life, which is to see the less than, to sit with the people who are different from us, to empower people to share their stories, to really lean in and be genuinely curious about what people go through. And so, like, from that perspective, I just think so much of your story is so beautiful. This idea of like really empowering people and taking this thing that was really shitty and like kind of happened to you and you had no control over it. And then being able to sit with people when they're at their lowest and be able to be like, look, I see you, I hear you, I feel you. This is where I've been. This is what my life looks like now. And really genuinely make people feel seen. That's a powerful thing that not every person has the opportunity to be able to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I would not classify myself as religious. Some people would say that I am because like I definitely, read my Bible most every day and whatever, but like to me I don't do it because I think that it is going to get me to heaven. And I feel like to me when I hear the word
Mhm.
religious, I feel like it's a lot of workspace and like, oh, I have to make up
Yes.
for this bad thought I had or whatever. Or if I don't go to church this Sunday and I watch a sermon on Monday, that, "Oh my gosh, God is gonna be so ashamed of me," or like things like that. Like to me, I feel like I do it because I want to. I don't do it because I have
Mhm.
to in order to, atone for something or, to get to heaven. So I think for me, I feel like I have a relationship with God. I believe in God. I enjoy reading the Bible. I enjoy the lessons that I learn from it and the lessons that I learn from the discussions that I have with people about it. But I don't feel like if I don't want to, especially like being chronically ill, like sometimes I do not have the bandwidth to be able to read something. I don't want to read it just to read it. I want to be able to like learn
Right.
something or get something out of it. Same with like church on Sunday. There are times where I don't watch church on Sunday. I watch it later in the week because sometimes I have a migraine or I'm sick and I'm like, I am not going to get anything out of this. And so I might as
Mhm.
well wait. And I think that that is better personally because then like I'm getting something out of it versus just doing it just to check it off my list.
Yeah, no, I love that you shared all that. And I think so many people focus so much on making, like, they make the wrong thing the main thing, you know? So,
Hmm.
like, this idea of, like, well, like you just said, like, I have to get to heaven. I have to convert all these people. I have to do this, that, and the other. And it's like, no. Like, the thing is that the more you push, the more you follow the rules, but you're not living a life that looks like who Jesus would call you to be. Who are you getting to heaven? Who are you
Hmm.
bringing to heaven when you you're not bringing anyone with you. If your whole agenda is to focus on the rules of it all or to like not really hear the person in front of you, like what good are you doing? You're making converting the main thing when the main thing is getting to know the person in front of you. And again, I love that I feel like we're actually very, very aligned. And I love that you shared that. It's nice to be able to have like a conversation with somebody who like is in it and gets it and understands, that lifestyle. And you can grow up and have so much love for something and truly believe, like I truly believe in God, but there's so many issues I have with a lot of what, religiousness and the church looks like today. And it's just so fascinating to hear that from somebody that's been through a similar but different journey.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think that people often miss the point of a lot of Jesus' teachings. Like he, told the Pharisees and the Sadducees, like, hey, you are being so focused on these little mini rules, like this is not what we're supposed to do. And like I came and I'm going to change this and whatever. And so I think that people miss a lot of the whole point. And I do think that yes, we should be telling people about God. And I'm not saying if someone were to ask me something and I, was reading my Bible or praying about something and this is where I got like this revelation from, I wouldn't share it and say that's what happened.
Of
But I
course.
also don't think that I need to, if somebody asks my opinion about something, for me to quote 10 scriptures at them and that be the whole thing because I think that it turns a lot of people off. I know for me, if I wasn't a believer and somebody every single sentence that they spoke, it was, "The Bible says this, and this is what I heard in a sermon yesterday." That would not make me want to learn more personally. And I know maybe there are some people out there that are like, "Oh, well, that would, intrigue me." Well, maybe it would, but for the majority of people, I feel like that wouldn't work. And I've had more people ask me about my faith just because they're like, "Oh, you have a piece about this that I don't fully understand," or "You have a joy about this that I don't understand." And I'm not saying that it's all because I have faith. I do think that, there are many people that I have talked to that don't share my faith that can find joy and beauty and peace in things that are hard. But I also think that it then gives me an opportunity to share what brings me peace, what helps me have joy. And I don't think I have to, like I said, quote 10 scriptures at someone to get that across. I can just be me and, be the light. And that's what we're called to do in the first place.
Right. I think that's what Jesus would want us to do is to be so fully yourself, to be so genuinely curious about what the person in front of you is saying, to be so open and honest about your own story that it makes people ask those questions. For women who feel like they've lost their purpose after a diagnosis or a major life change, what would you say to them?
I think that there's a lot I could say, but I think one of the biggest things is I think that no matter whether you're chronically ill or not, that purpose can shift. And I think that that is one thing that I have really learned in this whole thing of, the trajectory that changed when I started to get sicker was that purpose can change. I literally have the word purpose tattooed on my shoulder. And part of the reason that I got that tattooed on my shoulder was because I felt like the camps that I worked at gave me a lot of purpose. It helped me to see a purpose. It helped me to, like I said, it helped really save my life when I was at a really dark place in my life. But just because I have that word with the logos of the camp tattooed on my shoulder doesn't mean that that was solely my purpose. Like that was my purpose for that big chunk of time. That also helped set me up for what I'm doing now in many ways. It also doesn't, I think a lot of times when we have purpose that shifts or friendships that shift or big life changes, we then feel like to some degree that if we're happy about whatever's happening or whatever, that takes away from what happened before. And I think that we need to remember that just because that is no longer a part of our everyday life or that person is no longer a part of our everyday life, that doesn't invalidate what we went through that with them or during that season, and it doesn't change anything. And also you can take those lessons into your next season, whether it be a friendship that you learned lessons from or you just drifted apart, or a job or whatever it is. Like, just don't think back on those memories and think, oh, well, that was my season, and I wasted time, or I wasted time with this friend or whatever. Like, you didn't waste that time. What can you learn from it? What can you move forward into the next season and be grateful for those memories? And I think sometimes, like, if it is a big chunk of time or if it's a friendship and you may have to grieve during a little bit of the transition, and that's okay. And also to recognize that that's what it is, because I think at the time I didn't realize that's what it was. I didn't necessarily think of grief besides, losing somebody. And so I think that that is really important, because grief, while yes, we go through it in different ways with different people, different circumstances, everyone handles it different. I think recognizing what it is, I think, can be really helpful to name it and be able to then work through it in a different way than if you just don't realize what it is to start with.
Yeah, wow. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I've talked to my husband about this a lot because for me, a lot of what we talk about on this podcast is those friendship things, that friendship grief, that friendship gap, like what happens when these things shift? What happens when things change? And something Matt, my husband, is really good about saying is just because something ended doesn't mean it had to end badly.
Mhm.
Right? Just because a chapter of our life closes and it looks different doesn't mean that the whole chapter was bad. So, like for you in your example, like you love that camp. That was such a core part of who you were, but the camp wasn't the end all be all, right?
Mhm.
Like who you are, how you grew, your purpose, your story, figuring that was the purpose of you being at that place. And there were moments during that time that were monumental to your growth, but the purpose is you. The purpose is not the camp, right?
Mhm.
So like for me,
Exactly.
like, I was a youth pastor for such a long time. I loved my students. I loved that job. It was so fun. Things ended up changing that were out of our control. I mean, it was kind of in our control, but it was out of our control. And I thought that was gonna be my forever job. I thought that's what I was gonna do for the rest of my life. And I realized, like, no, but that is what gave me so much love for hearing people's stories. That is what taught me how important it is to sit and genuinely get to know the person in front of you. That job is what gave me a lot of empathy. That job, I still follow up with my students. I haven't been a youth pastor in 5 years, and I still have great relationships with a lot of my students who are in my student ministry, and it has everything to do with the fact that I was the purpose there. The church, that's great, but who the church empowered me to be and how it empowered me to be that person, it's given me every opportunity, every outcome for who I am now and how I lead now and my passions now. And it's allowed me to continue those relationships and find new joy, new meaning, new purpose in something that did end that was beyond my control. So I love that you shared that because I think that's just so true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with you.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, how would you say, now that we're kind of talking about like identity, we talked about this shift that you had. How would you say that your identity has kind of shifted in recent years, but especially as a ministry leader and podcast host?
I feel like I've been learning a lot over the last several years of that my identity and my purpose isn't necessarily what I can do for other people. I think
Mm,
oftentimes when people will ask, like, who are you? I think a lot of the time it's so easy to be like, I'm a podcast host. I help people. I connect people. I'm a blah, 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 which I probably did that in my introduction here. But I think that it's really important to realize, like, yes, I am a wife. Yes, I'm a podcast host, but trying to also think about things that of who I am and who that I am more than that. And I am kind and I'm compassionate and I'm a good listener and I'm good at seeing multiple sides of different situations and being able to bring people together. And I don't know, I just feel like it a lot of times when I was, working, I worked, 6, 7 days a week. I worked really long days. And then when I didn't have that anymore, I feel like a lot of the reason that I felt like I had no purpose anymore, I felt really depressed, was because I was like, well, what's the point? Now I'm just being. And so it's been really, really helpful. And, in some ways, I am grateful for the chronic illness making it so I had to slow down because I've been able to work on growing a lot. I've been able to work on, healing things that I hadn't really had the time to heal before, but also like realizing that my worth and my value doesn't change based on me doing more. So how can it, change by me doing less? Like that doesn't make any sense. So I think that that is something that I've really had to learn. Physically, I am much better at that now. I'm much better at resting. But I think that internally, I am still trying to work on realizing that I don't need to work on my growth. I don't need to read 10 self development books and work on all this healing in order to be worth something. Well, yes, I do love that. I do love doing those things. I want to become, a different version, better version, whatever of myself, but I don't need to do that. I'm still worth it just how I am now. And so I think that that is something that I'm really trying to learn and relearn, that I do not have to have this big, goal of who I could be and who I want to be and reach that, because I feel like we're never going to reach that as long as we're here on earth. Like there's always going to be something we can improve upon or want to do or whatever. And so I think that that is something that is really shifted for me.
Wow. Yeah, I love that you shared that. That is, first of all, you're on one of my soapboxes. So, something that I talk about with my clients a lot is when you are describing who you are, how are you describing yourself? Are you describing what you do for other people, or are you describing who you are to your core? So, I love that you shared that because I think so oftentimes, again, particularly as women who grew up in church settings, we are told that we are what we do for other people, right? Like,
And as
you
an older
are, like,
sibling, that's a
yes,
big thing too.
I'm also an eldest daughter, so I'm like, I'm with you
Yep.
there. Like, it is all about what we do for other people, how we serve other people, how we live for other people. And it's like when you stop and take a second to think about that, how does anybody know what you are? And, like just being really transparent and really vulnerable about my story a little bit. When I was in high school, I went through a lot with my parents getting divorced and a bunch of those things kind of happening. I no longer have a relationship with my father or anything like that. But because of that, school was kind of my like safe place. So I would go and I would live life super unmasked. I'm ADHD. I would be very loud. I would be very who I was. I marched to the beat of my own drum. I did not care what anybody thought about me. I was there to live my life and live it the way I wanted to live it. And then college came. And I got told by a pastor actually that I was too annoying to ever lead and that I needed to watch like how I was being or how I was acting because people would look at me and they would say, "Oh, you're too annoying. Like, we don't want to learn from you." Which, one, bullshit. But two, that caused me to spend years of my college years masking. And I feel like most people kind of have the opposite experience, right? They live elementary school, middle school, high school, kind of living that masked life and then kind of find themselves in college. For me, it was very much the opposite. And so I leaned very heavy into that narrative that the church kind of pushes during that formative time when everybody in their early 20s is getting married and settling down and focusing on what they're doing for other people. I very much leaned into that narrative too. And it was, okay, I'm going to not be the first one to talk. I'm going to not be the first one to speak up. I'm going to only focus on what I can do for other people. And, like physically serving isn't necessarily my gift. My gift is connecting and helping other people find their people. I think you and I are kind of similar in that way. And for me, being behind the scenes is much harder. But I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to be behind the scenes. I was told I have to work behind the scenes to prove that I was capable of leading in the front of the scenes, which to a certain extent, I do think like, we need to be well rounded in all areas of what we're doing. But like, you should never have to prove your worth to somebody, especially to a person in power. Like, if somebody is telling you that, run the opposite direction. Like, you don't owe them that. And coming out of that and kind of finding my own, getting settled down in my late 20s, is when I really decided to do that internal work and to face that grief of, oh, I've never had to be this person. I've been expected to be this person, but I've never had to be this person. But I was this person this whole time. How do I like kind of come back to myself? How do I get back to who I was? And peeling back those layers and realizing like, no, my natural gift is that I am a connector, that I like to connect people to other people, that I like to hear people's stories, that I am a talker. And like that doesn't mean we don't listen. Like I love listening too. But like if that's a skill that I have, I should be using it and I should be doing the things that I'm good at. And it has nothing to do with being too annoying or too much. And it has everything to do with be yourself, like be who you are and let other people see who you are. And so I love that you shared all of that because I truly believe that there is so much power in looking at who you are in your own story and being able to identify those things that make you you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think also knowing why too is really important. Like, why do we, want to do this? Why are we good at this? Whatever. Or why do we believe certain things? I think is really important because I think oftentimes, especially those of us that grew up in the church, we often get told like this is how it is. This is, whatever. And especially like if you grew up in a strict home, well, because I said so, whatever. And not knowing the why, and then just going through life going, okay, this is what I believe, and then people ask you why, and you're like, I don't know. That's what I've been
Yes.
told. And then you
Yep.
read the Bible for yourself, or watch a movie that you were told was so terrible. And then you're like, I don't understand why this movie was, so bad, or this music was so bad, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like, I think that it's really important to know why and to know for yourself what you like, what you dislike, who you are. And I think we're always discovering things that are new about ourselves. And I think that that is wonderful. And we should be curious about ourselves and who we are and the why. But I think, like I said, especially those of us that maybe grew up in more strict homes or in the church, I think it's really important if you don't know why to really dive into that and not be okay with just saying, that's what I was taught or that's what the Bible says. Like, okay, if that's what the Bible says, where does it say it? Why does it say it? What's the context? Because I think
Mm.
oftentimes people will be like, oh, this verse says this. And it'd be like, okay, well, what's the context? What's the historical context? Not just the verses
Yep.
around it. Why were they saying this? What was the whole purpose of this? And then when you realize that, you're like, that says something like the complete opposite, or it doesn't mean what I thought it meant. And I think that that is
Mhm.
something that's really important to discover and learn because otherwise you're
Yeah.
just going to live kind of like in a fog of just like, oh, well, I don't know. And don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, a pastor I worked with at one point, I had a great relationship with him, always kind of put it like when we're reading the Bible, we need to read the Bible literally and not interpret it literally. And I think that's where so many people make that mistake, kind of like what you just said. They take things out of context or they're reading that Bible literally and putting things that were written 2000 years ago into the context of today. And it's like, no, that context matters. It doesn't invalidate what the Bible is saying. The context of what it was written and how it was written, it matters. And if we're going to interpret it and how it impacts us today, we have to be willing to look at the whole picture and not just cherry pick and choose what we want to be relevant when we want it to be relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the ministry, we're reading through Leviticus at the moment, and that is a really tough book to want to read with all the like, now they said this, and the chapter we read today was like, okay, if you have a wound and it looks like this, and you've got leprosy, and then you've got to be, you know, isolated and whatever. And it's like, well, what's the point of this? And I understand, like, once you like look at the what's it called? Commentary like at the bottom and that can kind of explain certain things but I just think that it's really important to realize like the context of things and yes you could take something away from it like for me when I was reading that we also are reading in Mark and we had just read about the woman with the blood and back then they had to be isolated and like she was isolated for many years because she had her period for I can't imagine that would be terrible alone, let alone the isolation. But it like really
Yeah.
made me think. Like I'm so grateful that we, have Jesus and we don't have to live like that anymore. We don't have to have a wound that may or may not be contagious and then be isolated because, you may be unclean and it's just something that's, it's not contagious. And I don't know. I feel like you can take away some stuff that's more metaphorically and whatever from certain things. But I think sometimes, like I said, you said we have to read it for the context that it was and not just, I don't know, make our own interpretation of what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And we keep coming back to this topic, and I love that. I love that we keep talking about, faith, because it is hard to find people to have those like honest conversations with in this day and age. Like people, have so many different opinions and they don't want to I'm a big proponent in radical honesty. Like believe what you believe and be honest about what you believe and be willing to talk about it openly and engage it curiously. But kind of on this topic of taking things in context and all of that good stuff, I feel like something that a lot of my audiences kind of struggle with, something I personally struggle with, it's something I just talked about in my own story, was this pressure, particularly for women, to stay quiet or small or put together. I think that's a pressure that's found commonly in lots of spaces. I've seen it a lot in like church and in faith spaces. And so my question to you as somebody who, has kind of been in those spaces, who sees this in the clients that you're working with, how do you unlearn that pressure, you think? And I'm not asking because I have an answer. Like I'm genuinely asking. I have thoughts, like, but I don't have all the answers either. So I'm curious, like, what your thought on that is.
That's a really good question. I feel like for me, there's been different phases. So when I moved out on my own and I was discovering who I was to some degree, I feel like I was very loud and I don't think I realized it at the time. I don't know for sure, even, for sure that this is why I was doing it. But I think a lot of it had to do with I was trying to discover who I was, and I felt like if I wasn't loud and, whatever, that I don't know, that I wouldn't be heard or that I wouldn't be taken seriously. I don't know. But I also feel like and I felt like I had a voice to some degree. Like people wanted to hear it and it's like, okay, well now I can say it and so I'm gonna speak it. And I think I am a little bit more of a louder, extroverted type of personality. But I also think that I've slowly had to learn that there's a balance. So, some people that
Mm,
meet me, I am very quiet around them. And it's not because, I'm shy or I don't like them. It's just I'm more in like a listening space. And also being chronically ill, sometimes I don't feel good. So I might go to something and I don't really feel good, but I'm gonna go because, I feel well enough, I guess, to go. But I'm not necessarily in the mood or capacity to want to hold a really long conversation. So I like listen to the conversations around me and chime in every now and then. But I think there needs to be a balance, I guess, is just really being secure in who you are and your opinions about things and why it kind of goes along with the knowing why you believe something, why you think something, and realize when is the time to say it and when is not the time to say it. Because that I don't think you need to be forced to be quiet or you don't need to not share your opinion. But I also think sometimes it isn't the place and it isn't the time because you may be around people that don't agree with you. You know they're not going to agree with you. You know that it's just going to cause a debate. And, maybe sometimes that's good. Debate is just like not necessarily a bad thing. But I think if you know that it's basically going to be like talking to a brick wall and they're not going to be able to come around to your point of view, then maybe now is not the time to contradict what they're saying or to share your opinion. And I think that especially when it comes to like church stuff or things that people may be scared of or whatever, I mean, there are so many things. Like I have so many people on the podcast that don't share my faith and we talk about different things and I love that. Like we get so afraid of these things and it's like do we not realize that like everything can be used for evil and everything well not okay no, I shouldn't say everything can be used for evil but a lot of things and a lot of things can be used for good. It's someone could have a knife and cut up vegetables and feed the homeless but they could also take that knife and stab somebody. Like it's not the knife's fault, it's the person in their heart.
I do think that that pressure to stay quiet, stay small, stay put together, that's something that so many people go through in so many spaces, particularly in the faith space. When I was in high school, I went to they called it an etiquette retreat. And it was sold as a free retreat to the parents of the students in 6th to 12th grade. And the girls and the guys were separated. And the girls all had to sign purity contracts and learn etiquette and how to like serve
Don't even get
things.
me started on that.
Right. The girls only had to sign purity contracts. And then we had this whole like meal where we would practice like putting things on the plate and, the you're a dirty, it was like, it's bullshit. Like you want to talk about labels, like comes up in things on the church too. It comes up in
Oh,
purity culture.
hmm I
It's
oh
so
my goodness,
fucked up.
yes. Yeah, no, no. I grew up until I was, I don't know, maybe 8, wearing like normal clothes. And then I started, we wore skirts that were down to our ankles, didn't wear pants, wore like undershirts under tank tops, couldn't show any little bit of cleavage, couldn't show like, I think it had to be all the way to our collarbone. But basically, if we wore tank tops, it had to be like 3 fingers, 2 fingers, whatever, all these things. And I think it's just so ridiculous to teach women that they are responsible for men's thoughts and actions. Because
Say it louder.
this is a whole other thing, but I was, people were inappropriate with me, and I dealt with sexual abuse when I was dressed, barely showing anything. And then also it happened when I was wearing less clothes. It has nothing to do with the clothes. And you could be like, oh, well, how are you acting? No, it has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. And, you know, somebody could be, acting more provocatively and nothing happens to them. And somebody could just be sitting there minding their own business and something happens to them. Like it is the perpetrator's doing. It has nothing to do with the other person. It doesn't matter whether they had substances, alcohol, whatever. It doesn't matter. And the whole purity culture thing, and I don't know.
Girl, yeah, I could go off on a whole separate tangent about this. But first of all, I'm so sorry that you went through that. And you're absolutely right. It is always the perpetrator's fault. And it's one of my biggest gripes and grievances with the church is that, growing up, and I would like to think it's better now in most situations, let's give benefit of the doubt. I don't know every church and every church situation, but growing up and a lot of stories I've heard from a lot of other people, particularly women and members of the LGBTQ community,
Hmm.
is that this idea of purity culture. I have a very close friend of mine who went to a non-denominational church and they weren't upfront about their, what they believe when it comes to the LGBTQ community. So this person went and like was a like valued, like thought they were valued. And then in a small group, their small group tried to pray the gay away. And it's just like
That's a whole other thing. That's so ridiculous.
it's right, but it's these things like this, like we get so caught up on these labels. Like you want to talk about labels and the church wants to talk about like things like Enneagram and tarot and breathwork. Those are terrible for you and they're of the devil. But then okay, so how about your views on purity culture and praying the gay away? Like we're making what's not the main thing the main thing. Like you want to sit here and focus on the rules and the wherewithal and the labels, and you don't want to get to know the person in front of you. You don't want to hear their story. So be honest about that or do the work to know the person in front of you and to hear their story before you sit there and go off about a label or the rules.
No, I know so many people that love Jesus so much and are part of the LGBTQ community. Like it's so ridiculous. With clothing, I don't get it with the whole like, oh, well, that's a woman's clothes, men's clothes. It's like it's fabric. It's fabric.
Literally.
Back in the day, like Jesus' time, men in other cultures, men wear what some would consider a dress. So I don't get it at all.
Literally. Literally. All right. So, kind of again, full circle here. You talk a lot about this message in your podcast and in who you are. I've seen it in your content as well, that you're loved and your story matters. And I am with you 100% on that because that's a big part of my message as well. But for you, what does that look like in practice?
I feel like for me, when it comes to allowing other people to feel that, I feel like just allowing people to have like a safe space and feel like they can open up and, not judging. And like I said, there have been times where I've had people on the podcast and I just like haven't agreed with everything that they've said. And I, said like, oh, I don't, fully, understand that or I look at it from this perspective, but I never am dismissive about it because I never want people to feel like I just, overstepped or I shouldn't have shared that because I want people to feel comfortable. Whether I agree with it, whether I've heard of where they're coming from, whatever, like I want people to feel safe. I want people to know that they are loved and they are worth it and they are priceless, which is what I say at the end of every episode. And, I want them to know that they have value as a human being. And regardless of their background, regardless of what they've done, what they may do, what they think, what they feel, we have so much in common. And I think that there are so many differences. And I love being able, my podcast is called Beautiful Legacy, but it's spelled BEYOUTIFUL because I want people to realize that they are unique. Their story matters. And I want to highlight that. I want to highlight the uniqueness, but I also want to highlight the commonality. And so I guess I just want to give that safe space. And I think for me, being able to share my story, I think getting more comfortable with it has been really, really lovely with being able to do the podcast and stuff. And there still are parts of my story that I don't go into a lot of detail with. Regardless, I think that it's important to be able to share a story. And I think that me sharing my story sometimes also then gives people that listen that then come on the podcast feel like they have a safe space because they feel like they know me to some degree. And I am really, really grateful for having that ability to be able to do that. And also, like sometimes I do like have imposter syndrome with the podcast and, I'll be like, oh, who would care if I just stopped it anyway? Like no one cares. But then at the same time, I get so much positive feedback of I really needed to hear that. That really, impacted me. That changed, my thought process or my perspective on this, whether it's something I said or a guest said. Like I love being able to be able to bring most of my episodes are with guests. And I think that that has been really, really amazing. And I absolutely love being able to do it. And I don't have any plans of stopping, even if nobody listens and no one cares.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And, having listened to your podcast, like I could also say, like, you really do a great job of facilitating that space for your guests and for your people. And that mission is very transparent in who you are and in what you're bringing to the table. So keep sharing your story, keep doing what you're doing because what you're doing, like you say to everyone else, does matter and it is making a difference. And if we don't genuinely believe that, in ourselves and in what we have to offer, how are we supposed to teach other people to believe it? Right. And so,
Hmm.
again, I feel like it all kind of comes back to that idea of purpose that your purpose is to be who you are as you are and to share that openly and honestly and to engage others curiously. Meet them where they're at, hear their stories, listen to where they come from and who they are. And don't be afraid to take up space, even when your voice shakes, even when it's scary to do so. Who you are matters, where you are in each moment matters, and it's so special that you are able to be there. So, I love that you shared that. I love your mission. I love your work. And I'm so grateful that we've had this time together. I do want to remind my audience if you're in a season of shifting, if you're feeling lost in that in between, I hope this episode reminds you so much that your story still matters. You are never too much and you're not broken. You're just slowly stepping into who you are. There's nothing broken about you to fix. So, before we kind of transition away, Abigail, I want to give you the chance to let my audience know where they can find you, how they can support you, learn more about you. Thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I love chatting with you. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram under Beautiful Legacy, also Threads. On Instagram, it's beautiful underscore legacy. And I'm sure she'll tag me and whatever, but it's BEYOUTIFUL for the beautiful part of that. And on the Instagram. I post a couple times a week in the feed, almost every single day, and the stories. You can find my website there. I'm sure she'll probably link my website somewhere as well. And you can find the podcast on all podcast platforms. And it is technically on YouTube, but I don't really post it on YouTube. Like I don't post full episodes. I just post some clips. So if you see that, you will be disappointed if you subscribe there and think that you're going to get full episodes because you're not. At least not at this point. But it's on all other platforms. I absolutely love, like I've said before, being able to talk to different guests. There's a new guest episode every other week. If there's a two-parter, there's, one week is the first part, next week is the second part. And then if I do a solo episode, it is on what would be like the off week. So it's like a guest, potentially either a solo episode or a part two or no episode. So generally it's like every other week essentially now. But there is, by the time this comes out, there'll be over 140 episodes out. So there are plenty to go back and listen to with all different kinds of topics. If you listen on Spotify, there are playlists that I've made. They're linked on my website, or you might just be able to search the podcast. But, there's stuff about the spoonie life, chronic illness life, mental health, soul health, inner world stuff, relationships, all kinds of different things. I've covered so many different topics with so many different guests in some solo episodes as well. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And like I said, so many episodes to listen to. So you can binge it and it will take you a while to get through.
Well, I'll have you on for a part 2 to even get into the spoonie life of it all, because that's a whole other soapbox topic for me. But thank you so much for being here, Abigail. It has truly been the best time chatting with you. And to my audience, I hope you have a wonderful Thursday, and we will see you next week.